Branson, him from North Carolina, who
Hi,
wants to
Branson.
know, have you ever only studied Western religion, or have you studied Buddhism, Hinduism, etc.? Hello, Brandon.
Okay.
Branson, sorry.
Hey, how are y'all?
Hi,
I'm
Branson.
very good, thank you. How are you?
How are you?
I'm doing very well. Hope y'all are too.
Yes, yeah. Well, apart from being inflicted with COVID at the moment, I'm fine, but soldiering on. So I'm going to let you ask your question to Nikki, because I actually have studied both of those religions. But if you want to ask your question directly to Nikki, and we'll, let her answer and see what that brings forward. Branson?
Yes.
What was your question?
If you had so my question to you is, have you studied other spiritual philosophies or different Eastern religions? Because I actually follow you on Twitter, and while I don't agree with everything you say, I definitely have that mutual respect for someone who questions what they are told. But I'm just curious, what's your background other than Christianity?
So, yes, I have studied them. The journey from Christianity to atheism wasn't just a direct jump for me. I did go through Yoruba, Hinduism, Buddhism, science of mind. I have chakra tattoos to demonstrate the foolishness of that phase in my life. The predominant reason that I focus on Christianity is because of my upbringing, where I live geographically, and the daily interactions I have with people in my environment and my family. Being an African-American woman, Christianity is an integral part of my cultural day-to-day existence. And that's why I focus on it predominantly, as my number one goal is to help Christian or African Americans specifically move out of Christianity into, hopefully, superstition aside, but more progressive beliefs such as Buddhism and potentially Hinduism, depending on, I guess, the sect. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I can ask another. What made you turn away from Buddhism or Hinduism, or what didn't make sense to you?
So I actually do incorporate several Buddhist rituals in my day-to-day life. Actually, well, you probably can't see it, but I mean, this is just, I like Buddhist statues. I like things like that. I have quite a few. I like the concept of Buddhism in Buddhism regarding trying to stop trying to change your environment and allowing things to flow. That suffering is a choice because it's trying to resist what's occurring in your, I guess, milieu, and assuming that you can even do much to change it. So it's more for me, Buddhism is more of a philosophy, not necessarily a religion. And I meditate. I try to do it daily. It's really helped, especially, since I know you're following me on Twitter, the past month of my life has been rather tumultuous. So I've actually been incorporating more Buddhist practices just in my coping mechanisms in my day-to-day life. So I still use Buddhist practices.
What about you, Branson? What's your experience of them?
So I just like learning. I love learning about ancient Egypt and the Indus River Valley civilization and just different spiritual practices. I just realized there's so much symbolism in them, and that can be like overwhelming a little bit. So I'm trying to like break it down a little slower. But ultimately, I think that the Western world interprets a lot of spiritual practices literally, and that has kind of turned a lot of Westerners away from spiritual teachings just because it's so symbolic. And unless you're familiar with symbols, it just sounds like absolute, fairyland. Just doesn't make sense. So that's kind of where I sit. Just someone who just loves learning about different cultures and their symbols.
Do you think that, you said the spiritual aspect. What do you mean by the spiritual aspect of them?
So By spiritual, I mostly mean when they talk about raising your vibration and different things like that. That, to me, is a little bit more spiritual because we haven't done, there's just not a lot of science regarding consciousness. And so I also view consciousness as somewhat, quote unquote, spiritual, just because, you know, it's hard to show someone consciousness other than a conscious being. You know, you can show someone a conscious being, but not the consciousness itself. So when I use the word spiritual, I think more just things that cannot be proven or shown, at least at this time.
Do you think using that word, and I'm no particular problem with it, I'm just throwing this out there. Do you think using that word might be slightly confusing to a lot of people because it does have a lot of kind of supernatural connotations with it? And,
it's convoluted.
Yeah. Do you think that might cause people who you're talking to, if you're having these conversations, kind of to think you're talking about something more than you are talking about, somebody to attribute a supernatural element to what you're talking about, which it doesn't sound to me like you are doing?
So that's actually exactly why I do it, because I want people to ask the question, well, what do you mean by that? So which I greatly appreciate y'all doing, because I know so many people, or I've come into contact with so many people who would just assume something and then run with it, and they would just completely misunderstand me. So the reason I use that word is really to build bridges and trying to have people understand that a lot of these spiritual teachings aren't as far-fetched and far off from just the way the universe works. You know, perfect example is the Hindu Trinity, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. They're all representations of the creation of the universe, the preservation of the universe, and then the destruction. So it's a cyclical cycle that these gods represent. You know, I'm not saying these gods are literal, but there's a spiritual, or at least more mystic aspect once you're familiar with the symbols of certain religions or spiritual practices.
And that's what religion was devised to do, right? Was to provide some type of structure, some type of understanding for things in our environment that we don't quite understand or comprehend just yet. And while I appreciate that, and I completely understand what you're saying, and I have done some pretty in-depth study of Eastern religions in conjunction with Western and also Middle Eastern as well, I guess I'm a little bit hesitant when it comes to applying those symbols to actual physical occurrences in the universe. For example, the creation, quote unquote, which who knows if it was actually created, the existence and the destruction, those are physical happenings that happen within a physical realm that we can observe and research physically. So for me, there's kind of this blurred line between actually approaching the world scientifically and then taking what we don't know and then applying this symbolism to it. And I think that can be a little bit dangerous because when that bleeds over into the physical realm, for example, with astrology, people actually trying to use the stars and other things like that to interpret and understand what happens in the physical realm. I think that to me can be a little bit dangerous, but it does also depend on who is using the symbolism and how they're applying it to their everyday lives and how that affects others. But while I appreciate symbolism, I guess what I'm saying is I would just rather look at it in a physical, like more empirical perspective and just, what is science saying about this? Do we really need the symbols? I guess is what
I think that's where I was going to come in as well, because you said this about the scientific aspect, and then you also talked about the cyclical nature of the universe, and that doesn't necessarily match up with what we understand the science to be. And I was just wondering if you could kind of expand on that a little bit for us, Branson.
So we don't have any concrete proof of whether the universe is just started and it's just going to stop, or if there's going to be a big snap, the Big Bang we know, right? And then the theories on how it ends is a big crunch, which so it comes from a singular point, it expands, then goes back to a singular point. and then it restarts.
There are a few.
So
there are a few theories. That's a big one, sure.
Yeah, that's not the kind of prevalent theory in science or in cosmology. The prevalent theory, as I understand it at the minute, is the kind of heat death of the universe. And I've heard of a few people who are kind of into kind of Eastern religions and Hinduism specifically talk about this cyclical nature and cite the Big Crunch, but that's not the leading theory that is out there at the moment. And I'm just wondering from your perspective if you're leaning into that a little bit too much just to kind of fit the Hindu texts, or whether you're more interested in following what the science actually says.
Or potentially too, it could just be a attempt to allay personal fears and concerns about how life will end, and trying to find those answers to maybe bring some peace to yourself personally, which is perfectly fine. But to follow up on Richard's question, why are you aligning these symbolic ideas with what science has presented thus far, or at least trying to do that?
So science works on theories, and while a theory, gravity's a theory, but gravity's real. So I'm not saying just
to quickly interject, theoretically, do you know the difference between a colloquial theory and a scientific theory?
No.
Oh, okay. No problem. No big. So a colloquial theory, when people say the term theory, they're using it as if they are saying, I have a theory that this is how this particular thing occurs, but without much evidence behind it. When the scientists say the word theory, that means that this is a demonstrable, repeatable fact. It is empirically supported, that is consistent. So the theory of gravity, gravity is something that has been demonstrated, has a strict definition and how it occurs, and it is repeatable. Scientific theory is not the same as a colloquial theory. So the theory of natural evolution by natural selection, that is actually demonstrated repeatedly. That is something that is consistent. So a scientific theory and a colloquial theory are not the same in that regard. But that's a common misconception.
Okay. So what was the question before that?
Why are we using these religious symbols to, I guess, draw parallels to the real world, rather than just kind of riding along with what science says until science doesn't have an answer, and then admitting there really isn't an answer, and then just kind of sitting with that?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the reason, in my opinion, and again, I've only been studying this for 3 years, so I'm fairly new to it. To my understanding, the Younger Dryas event had several cataclysms and wiped several civilizations. Whether you want to call them advanced or not, there's no proof that they were advanced, but sites like Göbekli Tepe show that there were traces of architecture and civilization. The reason that symbolism was so important for these cultures is because they understood that a comet can hit the Earth, floods can happen and absolutely destroy knowledge. So using symbolism, it's a lot easier for us to tie in more, or it's easier for them to transfer the knowledge rather than use specific symbols only for one culture. So like if we came across, or if our civilization ended and then they came across a bunch of our algorithms and formulas for the universe, most likely they would have literally no idea how to decipher it and what we were even talking about, unless they were able to find some sort of codex. Using symbols, it's a little easier to at least draw a general perspective. So I like the way science goes in the sense that these mythologies draw a very broad picture, and then science is able to come in with formulas and demonstrate certain parts of the story and give it some validity. Like there was no global Great Flood, but during the Younger Dryas period, sea levels did rise a substantial amount over, a couple years or a couple centuries.
So here's the kind of difficulty I'm having, and please correct me if I'm wrong at any stage of this, because I don't want to misrepresent you. You seem to be saying that kind of the Hindu, we'll stick with Hinduism at the minute, kind of idea was that they're using symbolism to broadly paint this picture of the universe, which they understand. Is that what you're saying? They actually understand the universe, and they're putting it in a symbolic manner so that people in the future might understand it if civilization ends. Is that am I correct in saying that?
Yes, for the most part. Knowledge is a lot easier to pass down in stories. You know, it's easy to be told. We were all told bedtime stories as kids. The difference is we were told the Three Little Bears. They were told about these gods creating the universe, and their story, in my opinion, thought, or at least actually happened.
My kind of field of study is really just studies. And symbolism, I agree there is a lot of symbolism in Hinduism. There really is a lot of symbolism in Hinduism. If you look at example for Hindu temples, they're created on a kind of, it's almost like a grid system, if you like. And each part of the temple corresponds both to the outer universe as a whole and the inner universe of the person. So there is a lot of symbolism in Hinduism. The part where I'm having the disconnect with you is that the symbolism is an accurate representation of the universe. And I think if we actually have a look at that, it's a representation of their mythology, but that mythology doesn't necessarily line up with what we know to be of the universe. And, you know, coming back to the example that you gave earlier, the kind of cosmic crunch, that is an idea about the universe, but it's one of many, and it's certainly not the leading one. So there seems to be some kind of disconnect. It's kind of, it's moving towards a little bit of the God of the gaps. I think is talking about, and, you know, I just wondered what you thought about that.
Just a quick interjection as well. In the event that some futuristic alien species finds the human race, I would be less likely to believe that a type of esoteric cultural symbol, such as Krishna or Brahma, Shiva, would be easier interpreted by them than just a mathematical formula or physical equation that they could come to understand on their own. For example, what I'm saying is, let's say that humans are wiped out. If a species comes and finds some type of relic from our time, and it's a religious symbol, I think they would have to do more research to understand what that meant, rather than if they found a relic that represented a mathematical equation or something else that they could possibly come to understand on their own. Since physics and mathematics are consistent, logic is consistent, I would think that a religious symbol would actually convolute things more and make it more difficult to understand and transfer a message than something more empirical or straightforward, such as math or logic. But yeah, continue with what you were saying, answer Richard's question. I just wanted to say that.
They wouldn't know the difference between a religious symbol and the number 3. You know what I mean? These are just technically everything is a symbol, all numbers and alphabet. So they're all symbols. It's just, you could 100% be right. You know, they could, if they did exist and they come, they may be able to decipher the equation way easier than they would a story about.
I think the difficulty we're having is that, what kind of math does and other abstract concepts, for example, logic, they are descriptions. They describe how the world actually works. Right. So it doesn't matter whether we're here or whether you're an alien on a planet 25,000 light years away. The same, as far as we understand it, the same laws apply throughout the universe. So they would be able to kind of understand those mathematical symbols relatively easily, rather than kind of a folklore which has come up from a particular region of the earth and reflects the beliefs of those people about the universe at that time. And I think we're kind of getting these. I think you're getting a little bit convoluted, and this, I would say, please look into this more, because you're definitely going both Hinduism and Buddhism, which are what you called about, and we haven't really had a chance to talk about, are both great subjects to discuss, and the subjects I'd like to discuss more on this show. So please do call back in future, and let's continue this conversation, because for me it's really fascinating. But I'm kind of, in the meantime, I'd implore you to kind of move away from the kind of symbolic aspect and look much more at the kind of academic work that's out there on the symbolism, because symbolism is there in Hinduism, but you can actually look at the academic work around it, rather than kind of reading these esoteric books which kind of vaguely connect Hinduism with the universe and don't really touch upon what modern science is actually saying. So,
or any other religion, all types of religions have, I believe it's cosmogonies is the term, cosmogonies ideas and accounts of how the world came to be. But what unites all of these things and what we can all come to terms with and get on the same page with is science and empiricism.
Yeah, Branson, thank you very much for your call.
Thanks,
we do
Branson.
Appreciate it. It's been a good call, and I would like you to call back again in the future if you can. Thank you.